All right. Hello and welcome. And thank you for having me. My name is Jan. I'm from the internet and I'm here to help. I always wanted to say that. It's such a good line. So I work at Twitter and I work in the information security, and I am a New Yorker at this point, which means I'm particularly cynical and bitter, like hopefully or presumably most of you. And normally I give talks about technical things. And today I want to do something a little bit different. I want to give a talk that is more uplifting than usual, than what I usually talk about. Normally, all hope is lost, we're doomed, they are after us, tinfoil hat and all that. But I actually want to talk about something different today. So I have a daughter, well I have two daughters, but one of them is old enough to take to musicals. And we took her last year to see two shows, amongst others. We saw Annie and we saw Matilda. And the two of them, I don't know if you're familiar with either one, have very, very different messages. Little Orphan Annie is clearly a piece of the Depression, and the main message there is, you know, things are grim, just stick up your chin, you know, plow through, things will get better, and eventually Daddy Warbucks comes and bails you out. And that is not a really nice message to give to your children, I think. We also saw Matilda, which is by Roald Dahl, and that has a very, very different message. The main message in Matilda is that you are the one in charge of your business, of your story. You can change your story, and you can make a difference. And I found that to be particularly more uplifting than Little Annie, and also more applicable in the current situation that we find ourselves in with respect to internet privacy and security and all these things. And this is why I entitled my talk, All is Not Lost. Things may be bitter, but we're not at the bottom. We can always still improve. But we do need your help. And by we, I mean everybody in the information security world can improve things, but that's not it. We need help from people outside of our industry, outside of our organizations, and we need help from everybody to make things better. So in social media, we have a fundamental problem. The general idea of how startups currently make money is they come up with some weird idea, and then there will be profit, right? Normally this involves, you know, collecting information about users, selling ads, allowing people to upload their address book, because what could possibly go wrong with that? And then to make some money out of that. And that is true, that for the most part this seems to be what startups currently do. And it's true that this is a problem, because it means that the more information you have, well, first of all, it means that you can sell advertising, which is bad as it is, as far as I'm concerned. I spend most of my time evading advertising on the internet for the most part. But what's worse is, if you have this information, other people can get it. Other people being either malicious people, or governments, or the intersection of those two sets. And so if you have this data, then you have a fundamental problem of protecting this data. And it would be nice if we could come up with a different model. And then the circles of information security, we oftentimes see people who are very, very critical of social media and who do speak about that and who say, you know what, Twitter and Facebook and all these other companies, they're terrible because they collect all this information and this is really, really awful. But I think it, you know, while that is true, it has certain true aspects, it is not the entire truth. Meaning we do have a conflict of interest in collecting information about users and making money off of them, but that does not necessarily mean that we're all evil and that all hope is lost. In particular, I think the last couple of months have changed not just how we do our business, but the entire world. Things have changed in the last couple of months. Things are very, very different right now than they were about 6-7 months ago. The world has changed. You may remember on June 4th, headlines were fairly nimble, fairly uninteresting. They looked like this. Or like this. People were not paying much attention to really important things. This is what was happening on June 4th, 2013. The next day was a very, very different story. Who remembers? Anybody happen to know? Well, June 4th, 2013 Exactly. It was the first revelation. It was the first announcement of NSA collects data about voice calls. It's just metadata, right? So who's to worry? But that was the first revelation of many. And this is something that I think nobody really anticipated. Those of you who are in the information security business, like I am, we are cynical. We all say like, oh yeah, sure, we knew the government is collecting all this information. Everybody says that. But nobody really realized how true it was. So there is something different about thinking this and being labeled a paranoid about this and having these paranoid concerns actually be confirmed. What I think is really interesting is that this changed the world in many, many ways. Because not only were these revelations, did they come out, not only did more and more revelations come out, on and on, they're still coming out to this day. There's been very consistent revelations, news coming out. But what I think is really interesting, and what can give us hope, is that people actually care about this. And not just people like you guys who come to a talk like this. I'm fully aware that I'm preaching to the choir here, but sometimes that at least makes me feel good. And hopefully you can go and take that message to other people too. So people, regular people, seem to really still care about this. That means that the world has changed. Things are no longer as they were, where people did not care about this business. Nowadays they care. The world has changed because we learned about all these programs, and I'm sure you're all familiar with them and the complete ridiculousness of the program names that they were released under. We had the PRISM program, obviously, muscular. Then we had X-keyscore. All this time people tell us, it's just metadata, don't worry your little head about that. Then we had the targeted attacks. All of these coming on. These names are just gold, right? Comedy gold. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I was out at Twitter last week for our Hack Week, and I did a wait, don't pound me, a radio show kind of thing. And we did guess whether or not it is an NSA word, an NSA project, or a TV show. And you could not make this shit up, right? I mean, they actually have Iron Chef. But anyway, so then even up until Friday we got news about Dishfire. And we had the press conference by Obama, which had predictably disappointing results, where he made some suggestions about reforms. The most notable ones that were missing were, of course, where the government influences standards, undermines crypto efforts, is in the business of selling 0 days. All of these things were not mentioned at all. So this really puts us at a point where we think it's really depressing. We hear about all these things, and as I said, all of our paranoid fears come true. We've been informed about this. It seems like we are ready to throw in the towel. If you talk to crypto people, they sound pretty depressed too. They say on the one hand, yes, we knew all about this. On the other hand, they also say there's nothing you can do. They are crypto people who give advice and say, you know what? You have to threat model. You have to understand if something is within your threat model or not. If your threat model is your jealous girlfriend having a tough or a hard password, yeah, that's pretty good. If your threat model includes the Mossad or NSA, then no, they're still going to get to the things that they want to do to you, and there's nothing you can do. And I think this is the wrong mindset. And I don't think everybody has that. And this is part of the lyrics from Matilda, the musical, which is the message, the main message, is that you have to stand up for yourself. If you sit around and accept this, then that is not okay. That is not right. You cannot accept these things and give up and say there's nothing we can do. Because quite frankly, the world has changed. We can do a lot of things, and we already have done a lot of things. If you look at what is currently going on, all of these revelations, that actually has opened our eyes. I say that June 4th, we were in a worse position than we were on June 5th and every day after. Because since then we have learned about it, and if you know about it, you can do something about it. We have learned that Newton's laws of motion actually do apply to cyberspace. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. We learned about these things. We had an action. SSL added and removed here with the cynical smiley in it. And then we had a reaction. There are several people in the information security business, in the industry, who said, you know what? Fuck these guys. This is not something I stand up for. This is something I need to do something against. And as a result, since then, we've had many, many companies start to bolden their efforts to implement encryption, to implement security across data centers, which they previously thought were safe. And people and companies have been making a difference. All is not lost. We have learned this. We have seen these revelations. And if you look at the comparison which the EFF did of which companies perform what sort of encryption, we see progress. All of these things that we see here, or many of them, are listed as in progress, planned for the coming year. All of these companies are making a difference. They are standing up. They took this, they looked at this, and they said, fuck these guys, I'm going to stand up and going to do something against this. All is not lost. It is not the dark days. We can get better. But we need your help. There are other companies that have not done this. And there's something that we need to do about it. We can do many things. We can do things about it as people who work in the industry, as technological people, or even as plain old customers, as basic customers. Yes?
Can I ask a question?
Please.
On the previous slide, I mean, and including obviously on this one to some extent, the vast majority of the companies actually rely on data mining for their revenue.
Yep.
So to somehow say that they're doing X, Y, and Z that makes them better, you know, as long as they're collecting the data anyway, and that's their business model, the fact is that internal adversaries, external governmental adversaries, whatever it is, can easily get that data.
That is absolutely
So
true.
it's kind of, it's good, but it's, at the end of the day, it's not good.
That is true. And that goes back to the initial point of saying, yes, we have a conflict of interest in the business model that is derived, or that only derives profit from advertising or from collecting other people's information. However, each one of these efforts still makes a net positive effect, because each one of these efforts makes it more difficult for either adversaries of any kind to get to the data. And it's interesting to note that certain companies have very clearly defined adversaries or malicious actors are anybody who are trying to break in, including the government, their government, or governments of other countries. They have very explicitly said, we treat these as malicious hackers, and we will do everything we can to prevent this. But there are some that have not taken any of these steps. And I think it is up to us, and it's partly our responsibility as customers, to hold them to this and to ask this from them. Whatever we hear about these revelations from the government, we've been told, oh, it's just metadata, right? And what do you have to hide anyway? Are you doing something that's illegal? And this is not what privacy is about. Privacy is not about hiding things from other people. Privacy is about saying people, you know what? This is none of your business. This is none of your business to look at this data. And that makes privacy your business. It is your business to care about your privacy and your business to stand up for it. Here's a funny thing about the word your. It's our business. You can't just say this is somebody else's business. I can go and say this is your business. You can't say, oh, this is your business to me. It is our business. We collectively have responsibilities to take action against these sort of things. So it also means that privacy to some degree is a business. And the business that all these companies are in, they're in the money-making business. They like that business. They want to stay in that business. They want to keep making money. So they have to either change their business model, or they have to come up with a way to either make money, or they have to figure out what else to do. If customers start to stand up and leave, if they start to demand these things, then businesses will change. Businesses are in the business of making money. If customers say, I want more privacy, businesses will provide that. But it has to be a critical number of customers who actually speak up and who request this. And that is something that anybody can do. It doesn't have to be a technical person. It doesn't have to be somebody with special skills or experience. You can just say, you know what? I've had it with this. I want more privacy. I want more secrecy. I want more transparency, what you're doing. And if you're not providing this, I will not use this service. Remember the old adage of saying, like, if you're not paying for it, then you're not the customer, you're actually the product being sold? Well, that is true, but if you leave, they have less of this product to sell. And the businesses, they like to stay in the money-making business. If enough people get up and leave, they will change the way they do business. And that is, I think, when companies will come up with new ideas of making money other than just collecting information and selling ads. But business have many aspects. One of the things that businesses are currently doing a lot is they are very metrics obsessed. I've known a lot of people or a lot of companies who say, well, we measure everything. And when we measure it, then we make a decision based on the outcome. There's this famous story of Marissa Mayer, who's now at Yahoo, who was at Google, where they measured whether or not a pixel should be over here or over there. And they measured the response. So people look at these metrics and they try to collect things. But there's a problem with that, because if you collect metrics and make all your business decisions around that, there's a number of fallacies you fall into. We have metrics fallacies that are based on confirmation bias and on observational bias. Because first of all, just because you measure it does not mean it's important. That is confirmation bias, right? You just measure what you expect to measure and you will see the outcomes that you expect to see. I've seen many companies do measurements over and over just to have their own prediction confirmed. It's very rare that you see measurements contradict what people pose as a theory beforehand. So there's a problem. We measure what we think we will see anyway. And that's something we have to get over. The other thing, though, is that not everything that is important can necessarily be measured. There are some things that you as a business, if you have enough customers, have to do that you cannot measure and say this is what is important, this is what we need to do. Sometimes the numbers that you're measuring are not telling the full story. If you work in information security, for example, you have a very hard time producing business metrics of saying, like, how successful was I? Did I deter 80% of break-ins? I don't know. All I can say is there was one or there wasn't one, and I don't know how many else are in there. Once I find them, I can tell you there was another one. But I cannot necessarily reduce the number of break-ins, because often I don't know if there are any. Security metrics are very, very difficult, but other areas have the same problem. So not everything that is important can necessarily be measured. And of course, absence of evidence does not imply evidence of absence, right? So this means that it gets trickier for you to measure and to show people what is important about your business. So my advice is to not only focus on metrics. I think metrics are a very, very useful thing, but you have to be aware of these biases that you have, that your colleagues have, when you interpret the data, right? Just collecting data, making a bigger haystack does not mean you are more successful in finding the needle, which oddly enough is the opposite argument that the NSA has been given, saying, like, we need a bigger haystack. And it's like, how does it? The other thing is, if you get more successful and you start to measure only the things that the majority of your customers are responding, what do you get? You basically get results based on the tyranny of the commons. The more people want something, the more you are feeding them what they want, the less you will feed the individual things, and you will get your custom handcrafted artisanal hipster card revoked, even when you are dealing with a startup, various things. So 90% of everything is crud is an old adage known as Sturgeon law, and other people say that, well, a million flies can't be wrong, so clearly what we should eat is, well, nevertheless. A business gets the customers they deserve. This holds for every company. What you make your core principles, what you make your foundational guidelines, this will attract the right users to this company. So it is up to you to change it and not say, like, oh, but we measure it and all of our customers want French fries. They're not necessarily the best food for you. You can make money with it, but it doesn't mean it's the right thing. 90% of everything is crud. And this goes in particular for security applications too. Look at this as an error message. This is what people thought would be a reasonable error message to a regular user. I assume that most people here in this room have an idea, oh yeah, what this means, and they're still going to say, click, yeah, it's fine, let me go to Facebook. Every single person I know will do this. It's a terrible error message. Here's another one. SSH errors. The whole interface is very, very difficult. These error messages, what happens? Oh yeah, I can't establish this authenticity of the source. Oh, let me connect anyway. Oh, something went wrong. I don't care. Users are not qualified to answer these questions because users, even the technical users who currently or normally use SSH, do not have the background understanding of the security implications of these things, the possible security implications as they might be. Most of the time they'll be fine, but sometimes they won't be. And then of course we have this, right? Those of you who may know PGP, if you look at the manual for that, it's a manual page that describes how PGP works, has over 3,000 lines. A program used to ensure end-to-end encryption between users has a 3,000-line document telling you how to use it. It is not a very good interface. And this is one of the dilemmas that we have. We have security tools who are written and designed by security engineers. Well, that makes sense, right? Because otherwise they wouldn't be secure. But the problem is these people have a very different expectation of how the tools are used and how the error messages are understood than the people actually using them later on. And this holds even for very technical people. These examples I just gave are all for technical people who use SSH, who use PGP. Those people do not fully understand and appreciate the failure modes of cryptography when shit happens. And this is why we need your help. We need help from other people. We need help not just from crypto experts. Crypto experts, they do a great job, they stand up, and as bitter as they are, eventually they come out and try to give an uplifting talk, and then they try to make things better. But they're not the only ones we need help from. You know? When you're developing a product, everybody will tell you, you know what? Talk to your security team. Because when you design a new product, there are probably security implications. And that is true. But you know what? The opposite holds too. When you write a security tool, internally, externally, talk to regular people who just push out a product. How are you going to push out a product in a company? Well, you have to understand what your market is. You have to understand how it will be used, the expected usage anyway. You have to understand what the failure modes are outside of the crypto failure modes, all of these things. So I say, all of you guys, you should talk to some goddamn user interface experts, because this is where the real problem lies at the moment. All these crypto tools, they can be safe if used correctly. But using them correctly is so hard that most of the time people will fail. The interface is not friendly enough. So we need your help, and OpenITP actually holds a user interface sprint in March. If you happen to be in San Francisco, I encourage you to participate there. User interface is one of the big challenges at the moment for security tools. And the help we need there is not crypto experts. The help we need there is people who have an understanding of how user interfaces work, designers who can make appealing logos and appealing graphics and make the whole thing a little bit smoother.
And end users.
And of course end users. And hopefully, if you build it, they will come, right? If you produce a good-looking, easy-to-use security tool, I think people will start using it if it's available. So there's one of the problems that we have as humans. Humans are limited in their social interactions they can have, meaningful anyway, by what is known as Dunbar's number, which is the number of how many people you can recognize and have good conversations with. And this leads to a very easy division of us versus them. This happens for individual teams. You know, developers see themselves as the shining stars and they produce the best product, and all these other people are clowns. And of course, sysadmins are seen as the people who flip everybody off, and they themselves see them as the saviors of the world, and so on. This is inherent in human nature, as far as I can tell. We want to have us and them. But that is not helping at all. If you want to produce a security product that has an impact, that attracts users, that makes it possible for other people to really use it and change the world, this is not helping. You have to understand that you have to work with other people, other teams. And the funny thing about us and them is it translates even from the small number to the very large. Everybody says like, oh, you know, it's me and my friends. It's a small group. And the others are them. And then there's a larger circle. My younger daughter, she's 2 now, she has a word for others, which is mind-blowing. She knows my mom, her mom, she knows my wife, she knows her sister, she knows her grandparents, she knows some friends, and then she sees other people and she says others. So this is a concept that people just intuitively build. And this translates. If you're in a small group, you start to think of, oh, your group are the peers and the others are the others. We in this room are us, and all the other people out there are the sheeple who don't understand security. InfoSec as an industry, it's us and it's them. As a company, you say, oh, it's Twitter and it's Facebook, or something like that. And no, it's not true. This is not helping to just divide this world like this. Turns out, other people are people too. And most of them are actually nice people. Most of them actually want to help too. Even the people in the other group. In information security, you know that your peers at your other companies are very nice people who only have the best in mind. They are not inherently evil. They are not staffed by bozos. They are just people who try to do the best for their business with the directive and the means that they have. And this idea of figuring out how to cross these gaps across different groups is something that I've seen in a couple of years appear a lot in the so-called DevOps world. DevOps, where developers work more closely together with operations. It used to be the case that developers produce a software product and they toss it over the wall to the operations team, which then deploys it, and when that breaks, it's the ops team problem. And over the last couple of years, there have been more and more collaboration in this world. And I think we can do the same. I think we should do the same. We can build a security culture. But you know what? It's not enough. What you really want to build is, you want to build a learning culture. A culture that encourages different people in different teams to look beyond just their limited scope and say, you know what, these other people are people too. I can learn something from them that helps me make my job better. One easy way to do this is to do cross-training of teams. You can hold boot camps where you just sit with another team for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, which is amazingly eye-opening when you realize, hey, they're people too, and they have problems. And sometimes when their pants are on fire, they don't care about X, Y, and Z, which I normally care about. You all of a sudden start to understand them better. It's something I very much encourage. As security people, you have to say yes more than no. You have to enable people. You have to come in and say, okay, what you're doing may not be ideal, but let me see how I can help you get to where you need to go. In security, we all know that you cannot keep other people from doing what they intend to do if they just want to get their job done. They will find loopholes and work around it. So you have to meet them and you have to enable them. You have to be more positive. No matter what you do, you have a responsibility to teach and be taught yourself. You can share with other people within your company. Just occasionally give a talk about what it is that your team does so others have a chance to learn. And then listen to other people and be taught about this. You can do this within the company, or you can go beyond that group and talk at industry conferences or to community events, anything that will help. And you want to branch out from what you're normally looking at. If you go to conferences, like my conference calendar has all the predictable conferences, and I'm being fed the same dog food everywhere. You know what? We should go to conferences that we're not experts in already, because then you may actually learn something about this other field. And the most important part is you have to start to listen. Listen to other people, listen to other teams, and not assume that they are the others. Because the coolest thing is, knowledge is not a zero-sum game. If you have knowledge and you share it with somebody else, you don't have less knowledge. You have actually, most of the time, more knowledge. I know this. I've been teaching university classes for over 10 years now, and every single time I teach the same class, over and over again, I learn something new. Sharing knowledge, giving knowledge away, increases your own knowledge. And if you actually share this with other companies, then that will also help. Information security, for example, is a non-competitive factor in social media. Nobody is going to change from one social media company to another social media company because they had an exploit this week and they had one next week. That doesn't make any difference. So if you see these trends, you see information security problems, you can contact your peers and share with them and help them prevent it on their side, and you will make the world a better place. And you can stand up. And the nice thing is also, the courage is contagious. If you are willing to stand up and do these things, you may be able to encourage other people to do the same things. And this will have a trickle-down effect. You can stand up and be the one who asks the question, says, you know what, if we're pushing out this feature, maybe we're collecting too much information. Do we really need this information? Can we do without? Or is this in the best interest of our users to do this? It may be difficult to do that sometimes when you speak up as the only person against, for example, the CEO pushes a great idea and they have a town hall meeting to push this idea, to stand up and say, you know what, is this in the best interest of our users? But if you do it, you will see oftentimes you will get responses, positive responses. Sometimes you get private emails that just say, like, you know what, I agree with you, and that can help. But that means that you're planting a seed in somebody else to do the same thing the next time. Courage is contagious. So all is not lost, but we do need your help. We need your help, every single one of you, no matter what your area of expertise is. You can help make this better, to improve the situation. These are parts of that song from Matilda, which I thought was so nice. Because it means that just because you find that life is not fair, doesn't mean you just have to grin and bear it. If you just sit down and accept it, you might as well be saying that it's okay. And that's not right. And if it's not right, it's up to you to put it right. You're the one who has that fate in your hand. Nobody else is going to put it right for you. Nobody else is going to change your story. It's your story to change. And sometimes you have to be a little bit naughty. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's a great rallying cry. I wanted to go back to the chart of what different companies are doing, and I wanted to ask you, as somebody who works at Twitter, so we see who's engaging in those protocols there, but I'm wondering whether there's a movement among any companies to investigate new protocols. If so, what kinds of ones are they engaging? Are they looking to make the system more secure in other ways that way?
Yes, I think that is definitely the case. Just to repeat the question, was like if companies who are engaging in here are also trying to push the industry forward to come up with new protocols and to work beyond just their scope and their level. And I think that is the case. At Twitter, for example, we encourage people to participate in IETF working groups, and we have several people who participate in those groups, in the HTTP2 business group, for example, as well as various other organizations.
Please be quiet.
The PurPass working group is another one that we participate in. The EFF recently opened a new mailing list called CryptoOps, where people can discuss freely how a company implements large-scale cryptography, which has been a big problem. And we participated, and I've seen people from most of the other companies participate in that. Which just goes to show to me that yes, all these other companies, they're not evil. They have, even though they may be my competitor right now, they're still nice people who are trying to make the internet more secure, and they're working on that. And new protocols are one thing. Right now, there's a big focus on HTTPS everywhere, and then of course perfect forward secrecy, which we see, where Twitter just announced in the fall that we do perfect forward secrecy, and there was a lot of interest from the industry to ask, how did you do it on this scale? Can you open source your tools around that? And we're working on those things too, and we're participating in the community, yes. Thank you.
Hi, you want to? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So I guess I'll give you a popular. I think I've listened to. It sounds like I feel like I've listened to something from Idiocracy. Are you familiar with that film? Since you're quoting all these pop programs, and I think this is obvious about communicating. There's been a lot of scholarly work about how you evoke teams to communicate, and I won't get into that. But I think this gentleman also over here alluded to it. The 99,000 pounds or whatever gorilla in the room is what the hell is going on with all the companies mining folks' data.
Yes.
And understanding how that plays with the privacy policy.
Right.
Because that's really the elephant here.
It absolutely is. And I had an internal discussion at Twitter the other day where we talked about how we're going to move forward with pushing out more encryption on all the levels and on all the links and everywhere. And it's a hard problem to solve. And somebody said, you know what, isn't it just a weird game? Isn't the only winning move not to play, meaning not collect the data? And I think we in the information security world agree on that. But it is not easy to make that a business case. And that is why I think it is important that we encourage our end users to demand this. And the more we get support from end users, or requests from end users, the easier it will be to make a business case to do that. And I do think that if the last couple of months continue, this trend continues, there may be startups or smaller businesses that develop a business model that is not based on collecting information and selling ads, I hope.
Yeah, but for instance, I don't know again what your model did, but I know there was some research that was done. Why all of a sudden it's such a revelation of people that Gmail is absolutely mining data, and why that all of a sudden became such a big deal. But that always went forth to my hypothesis that people don't give a damn or understand about privacy. And I worked in this. I worked on the original drafting committee for P3P at WC3. So I saw all this in the nascent days. But I've got to say that when you have a populace, and this is only reinforced by the fact that the privacy statements now have become unintelligible to most people. And I think that's a major problem. There is no transparency.
Right, and I think that we can demand that. I think we can improve that, I hope. I think you have a perfectly valid point in saying that people do not understand fully the privacy. But I think it's a too easy excuse to just say, people don't understand the problem. I think if people don't understand the problem, then those of us who do have to do a better job telling them, teaching them what the problem is. And I want to encourage people like you guys who come here. Obviously, you're part of the people who have more knowledge than others, to go out and share that so that we can build more people, or can just encourage more people to do that.
I was actually going to ask when we came back to the slide, how does Twitter actually compare to the PII liability that so many of these other companies have, which is ostensibly much larger, right? 140 characters is not Gmail.
Right. I think there's a number of things that people forget about Twitter, and that also lulls the users into a sense of complacency and secrecy. It's like, oh, it's public anyway, right? Like the whole point is that you're sending public messages. But that is the same concept where people say, oh, it's just metadata, right? This kind of is in reverse, because the metadata, like one person's metadata is another person's data. And oftentimes metadata is more important and more useful than actual data. And so it's not so much for other companies or for users to look at Twitter and say, like, oh, the stuff I send is really not that interesting. But where you are when you send it, what time of day it is, and all those things, this is much more interesting. And so that is stuff that Twitter does collect, and where we have our business model built around that, obviously. And that is something that I personally struggle with. When I joined Twitter, I said, like, I would like to make a difference, and I joined Twitter in part because they have a strong stance on privacy and protecting their users, and freedom of speech and standing up for people in governments as well as in privacy. But a conflict remains that, yes, we collect data and we use it to sell ads, and if we do that, then there's only a question of time until this data gets abused. And I do think it's important to try to figure out a way, can we do this business of collecting this data, but perhaps anonymize the data quickly enough so that it is still useful for marketing purposes, but not useful for data mining by nefarious parties. I have no solution for that.
How about paying for copyrights?
Paying for copyrights?
You wouldn't need that much advertising money.
I'm not sure I understand how that would work as a business model.
Okay.
But
You guys
yeah.
should talk afterwards.
Yeah, maybe. Yes.
Can you talk about a little bit applications like Silent Circle or Red Phone? And
Yeah.
is that something that you think is a sign of things to come, their success, or?
I hope so. So
Sorry, how do we move past that? Because Silent Circle is $10 a month. Most people will know
Right.
Can you explain what that is? 'Cause
Yeah, so the question was, there's a number of applications that provide actual end-to-end encryption of messages, text messages, for example, sending over the phone, SMS or iMessage, etc., where the service provider has no chance of seeing the data. And there's a number of aspects to that. Some of them, like Silent Circle, is a commercial product where they sell the service and it's closed source. And we have to take the people's promise, this is fine software, trust me. And then we have open source systems like Redphone with Moxie Marlinspike, who used to work at Twitter for a while, has developed as an open source system that also does that. And we just have to take their words saying like, that software is fine because quite frankly, we're not crypto experts that read the source code off the cell phone either. So one of the arguments that people sometimes say is, oh, commercial is worse than open source, and I don't think that is necessarily true. But to answer your question, I do think that this is a sign of things to come, that there will be more of those things. It's clearly currently the case that businesses are interested in that. I do think Silent Circle just announced the release, or will announce soon, the release of Blackphone, which will have even more encryption and protection. And I think the business world is very much interested in that, and that is a smart move on their end. And I hope that other services will fall in line. But that, again, brings me back to the problem of getting this to the customers and the metrics that companies use. Because if you, for example, Twitter has direct messages between users, right, that are private, that nobody can see. But of course, they are going through our service, so we can see them. And it would be nice to have those end-to-end encrypted. But selling this idea to business to put our resources into developing this and pushing this out, it has been a very hard case to make. And again, the people who work on this, they want to do this. They are really trying to do this, but they need help from outside to request this. And the last couple of months, I think, have been somewhat of an indicator that I think more of that will come, I hope. And there may be open source systems that will do that, but I also hope that commercial entities will see the value in that.
Do you have metrics in place at Twitter to keep track of that privacy sentiment among users? That is to say, do you have an estimate for how many people are leaving the system if you don't improve?
Not specifically, because that is very hard to measure, right? So we have some numbers that are interesting, and the ones that are public, everybody can look up. You know, for example, that Twitter adoption is not very big in Germany compared to other countries, and privacy is one of the main factors for that, is something we found. And the same holds for Facebook too. The Germans are, due to their history, understandably, much more concerned about privacy than, for example, Americans are. And so we have, some grand or high-scale numbers on that, but I don't think we have specific numbers of saying users leave because of absence of privacy features or something like that. I'm afraid not.
Well, the Chrome, Google Chrome browser, I read an article. Unfortunately, I was also the victim of this practice. That basically, there were extensions, right? The original company had a legitimate use for it, but then they sold it to this marketing company, and they took it over, and they decided to sneak in some things like hidden links. And by the way, we want to pop up a new tab showing our products that we're trying to sell you. And they're very hard to remove, by the way, so I just wanted anybody counter that? They found a solution?
Well, this is again a problem that's just security is really, really hard, and you have to, in order for you to make a reasonable decision about what you do and do not do on the internet, it's beyond most people's understanding, because you have to do the actual threat modeling. In this case, we had a party that developed a plugin that worked just fine, but then they sold this to another company which decided, you know what, we'll just make this be malware effectively. And that is not something you can really prepare for. But everybody has their own threat model. So there are some people, activists in particular, for example, who run by default and always without any plugins whatsoever, precisely for that reason. And then you have to trade a certain convenience and usability for the security that you gain. But you have to understand whether or not this is your threat model or not. And I think that we, as security experts, have to figure out a way to make this decision easier for people without doing this. So, sandboxing those things, but Chrome already does that. It's a difficult problem. in the back.
And what's your take on the cloud, and what would you like to see done on the cloud?
Well, so the cloud is interesting. It's particularly interesting for a company that has bought a couple of new startups, and now we have to try to secure the cloud business or bring them on our stack. I think there's nothing inherently wrong with the cloud. It's just you have to be aware what you're doing, meaning you take your data and you give it to another company effectively, because it's their hardware, so they can do whatever they want, really. If you're comfortable with that, then it's something you can do. If you're not comfortable with that, end-to-end encryption would be nice. Actual end-to-end encryption, not fake end-to-end encryption like certain providers offer, where they're like, oh, but we use HTTPS, so it will always be encrypted, except when we have the certificate and the key and so on. But again, I think there's tremendous potential for growth. Companies can come up with a way to say, you know what, I offer a cloud service that's end-to-end encrypted. And I will maybe sell it for a certain amount of money, or I will find some other business model that I'm not smart enough to figure out because I'm not a business person. But other people might be, and those are the people whose help I need.
All right, thank you. Can we get a little...
Thank you.